Hi, let's talk about how we got into this mess and how we're going to get out of it, which is regenerative economics. We got into the mess because of an ideology called neoliberalism, and we will get out of it by implementing more regenerative practices. Neoliberal economics is a story that we tell ourselves. It was created very deliberately by 36 men who met in 1947 at a hotel outside of Montreux, Switzerland, called Mont Pelerin. 1947, Europe is in ruins from World War II. These men met with the best of intentions. They wanted to rebuild the economy of the world. They believed that your freedom is the only thing that matters, individual liberty, that government is bad. It gets in the way of your freedom. They believe that markets are perfect and there should be no constraint on your ability as an individual to make economic decisions in this perfect market. They also believe that we're all greedy bastards, but that's okay, they said, because the market is perfect. And in a perfect market, you against me will somehow aggregate to the greater good for all. Ludwig von Mises was appalled at what National Socialism had done to trash Europe. Friedrich Hayek was scared to death of the rise in the East of Soviet collectivism. And Milton Friedman, again, believed that the individual is the only legitimate economic actor. He believed and convinced his fellow attendees that they had to enshrine this principle of individual liberty. Von Mises has said that the state, the government, is the main source of mischief and disaster. Hayek, a claim for equality of material position can only be met by a government with totalitarian powers. Friedman, government has three primary functions: military defense, enforce contracts, and protect its citizens from crimes. Anything else, any government entanglement in the running of the economy, he felt was evil. It led to a loss of freedom. Friedman went on to, he came back to the Chicago School of Economics and kind of took it over and spread this doctrine to economics schools around the world. So if you've had a class in economics, this stuff's in your head. He wrote famously in 1971 that there is only one social responsibility of business: to increase profits, to deliver profits to owners, to shareholders, so long as it stays within the rules of the game. They created the Mont Pelerin Society, which still exists today, and they got their members as advisors to every head of state on the planet. This is Hayek with President Ronald Reagan. They really remained still a fairly wonkish institution until in 1971, the US Chamber of Commerce asked the soon-to-be Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell to write a memorandum of how business could re-legitimize itself. 1971, this is right after the 60s, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Business was feeling a bit beat up on. It is worth getting, you can download and read the Powell memorandum. It is a little bit chilling because it tells you exactly how it is that we got to where we are today. Powell said that the American economic system is under attack, political power is necessary, and such power must be assiduously cultivated and aggressively used. Again, he spoke about freedom, and that, as the totalitarian states show, denial of economic freedom is inevitably followed by government restrictions on our other cherished rights. American business should stand up against those who would destroy it, that the ultimate issue may be survival and the freedom of our people. Powell laid out 26 targets. He said, we have to do long-range planning, have consistency of action, the scale of financing, sufficient money to implement this, and use political power. He targeted business, chambers of commerce, the business roundtables, campuses, graduate schools of business, high schools. He argued that this ideology should be put into textbooks, create speakers bureaus, ensure that conservative thinking gets equal time on campuses, that there is aggressive outreach through the press, books written, paid ads, influence politicians at all levels, lower court judges. And so the Judicial Crisis Network was created, and this is why we now have a growing number of conservative lower court judges who get groomed to come all the way up to the Supreme Court. And he was very clear, business should raise the money to get all of this implemented, that what was most important was to discredit the old ideology. Now remember, after World War II, government was fairly well respected. It had won the war, it had ended the Great Depression, it had brought middle-class prosperity across America and increasingly around the world. So these guys were fighting upstream against a pretty shared political belief that government was your friend. This is the ideology they set out to discredit. On the strength of the Powell Memorandum, a number of foundations put each of them something like $5 million for each of 5 years into creating and endowing Heartland, Hudson, Hoover, Heritage, American Enterprise, Cato, Judicial Crisis Network, Manhattan Institute, ALEC. These institutions are all still around. And they are what give us the conservative pieces of legislation, the judges, the infrastructure. This is the intellectual architecture of the right wing. Why are they all still here? Because they are endowed. Organizations who counter this, who argue for effective government, who argue for taking care of people first, not business, tend to be smaller nonprofit organizations that have to beg every year for their operating expenses. Is it any wonder they're a little less effective? In 1980, largely on the strength of the Powell Memorandum and this organizing, Ronald Reagan was elected in the United States, Margaret Thatcher was elected in the United Kingdom, and this ideology became the dominant global economic worldview. As a result, deregulation started around the world, corporate directors got more control, and now you started to see the business scandals throughout the 90s and the 2000s, scandals like Enron and WorldCom and the others that led in 2008 to the financial collapse. In a sense, the financial collapse was entirely predictable. Government had stepped back, it had taken its hands off of business. Business generated an enormous amount of wealth, but in general, not for you and me. As Nelson Mandela puts it, poverty is not an accident. We created it with the intellectual ideology that we hold. But the good news is if we created it, we can uncreate it. Until 1979, Reagan again elected in 1980, all classes of people were coming up pretty much together. After 1980, only the 1%. And now it's really the 0.01%. The '08 collapse, in theory, government was going to step back in and start regulating these big institutions. Not so much. The 10 biggest banks are bigger now than they were in '08. And they really don't know how to manage. This piece in the Financial Times, we don't entirely understand what's happening to advanced economies. So who's in charge here? We know from reports like the Natural Capital at Risk from True Cost that if you properly count the cost to the economy of the loss of nature, the cost to the environment, no company on earth is profitable. We are losing the economic value of about $4.7 trillion every year through the way business is doing business. And business is getting this for free. What's wrong with business? The way we're doing it is bringing us to collapse. The ideology that Milton Friedman started and people like Jack Welch of General Electric put forward of shareholder primacy, the only thing that matters in business is to deliver value to the owners, is not only legally wrong, it's morally bankrupt. And the way we do business has created the climate crisis. We're losing life on Earth. We have structural inequality, structural racism, and it isn't even good for business. The studies show that respect for business is falling. It's at an all-time low. Markets are a marvelous servant. They're a bad master. They're a terrible religion. And we've gotten these things confused. What do we want? What do you want? Ellen Goodman said that normal is wearing clothes you buy for work, driving through traffic in a car you're still paying for to get to a job you need to pay for the clothes and the car and the house that's sitting vacant all day so that you can afford to live in it. Is this making you happy? Indeed, the surveys show that GDP, the throughput of money and stuff in the economy, keeps going up, but the percent of people who say that they're very happy is going down. What would you suggest that I buy to fill the dark, empty spaces in my soul? This is called shopping therapy. It is trying to meet non-material needs with material things, and it'll never work. Thomas Berry said, we're in trouble now because we don't have a good story. The old story told us who we were, how the world worked, our place in it. It sustained us for a long time. It shaped our emotional attitudes, gave us purpose. It consecrated suffering, integrated knowledge, and guided education. We need a new story to educate us, heal us, guide us. Mandela said, I'm influenced more than ever before by the conviction that social equality is the only basis of human happiness. And Dana Meadows said, the future can't be predicted, but it can be envisioned and lovingly brought into being. The humble folk singer, Pete Seeger, said the key to the future of the world is finding the optimistic stories and letting them be known. We need a new story. Who are we? What do we want? And how do we achieve it? Here, I think, are the basics of a new story. One, we don't have any choice. Business as usual. We are headed for collapse, economic collapse, social collapse, civilizational collapse. Two, the solutions are here. We know what to do. Three, it's better business. You'll make more money. And four, people want it. Let's start with who are we? Dr. Paul Lawrence, Dr. Michael Pirson have put forth this scientific basis of who we are as humans. They say if if you consider the evolutionary biology, the archaeology, the anthropology, the genetics, humans have 4 drives. Yes, we want to acquire the things we need to survive and thrive. Once we have those things, we seek to defend them. The neolibs were right on that. But they say we have 2 additional drives. Humans bond. We care about each other. And we have a drive to comprehend, to create meaning, to create purpose in our lives. This is the skull of an old, toothless man. He was found in a cave in southern Africa, inhabited by a tribe of the humanoids, the pre-humanoids, who survived. If they were in it only for themselves, if the we're greedy bastards theory of humans is right, he would never have gotten old and he would not have been kept alive toothless. His people cared for him. They also found skeletons of crippled people. If you're in it only for yourself, cripples are of no use to you. You get rid of them. He was one of our ancestors. His DNA is in you. These pre-humans cared for each other, for others, and that runs in your blood. So when you care, it's not a bug, it's not a flaw, it's what it means to be human. It's who you are. A group of us got together a few years ago and took on the Powell Memorandum. If that was such an effective document in transforming how we structure government, how we structure economics, let's write a new memorandum. And so we named it after Dana Meadows, the humble Vermont sheep farmer and professor. And we called it the Meadows Memorandum. At the core, we say true freedom and success depend on creating a world where we all prosper and flourish. Institutions serve us best when they recognize our individual dignity and enhance our interconnectedness. And to thrive, business and society must pivot toward a new purpose: shared well-being on a healthy planet. This, we believe, is at the heart of this new story: shared well-being on a healthy planet. We need to transform culture, business, finance, education, the political system, civil society, ourselves, media, agriculture, energy. We need to transform all of these if we are to find real happiness. And there are a lot of groups around the world working on similar approaches to this. We're not alone in doing this work. A couple of years ago, 4 of us got together to write this book, to put forth this new story, and to share what we knew then about what's possible. What are the technologies to transform all of these sectors of the economy? Stuart Wallace, who for many years ran New Economics Foundation in the United Kingdom, Anders Wigman, Swedish parliamentarian, European parliamentarian, John Fullerton, who was for 18 years at JP Morgan, left as managing director to found Capital Institute, and myself. This book, A Finer Future, Creating an Economy in Service to Life, lays out the core of this new story. It's based a lot on the work that John Fullerton put together in this paper, Regenerative Capitalism. John points out that in nature, systems are sustainable because they're regenerative. Here's the system we have today. We, people, the planet, are in service to the economy, which is in service to finance. What's wrong with this picture? It's wrong way round. Finance is a tool to bring money, liquidity, to the real economy, which should be in service to life. This term, regenerative, is now arising around the world. People are latching onto it almost instinctively. Interestingly, it's in the Bible. The Greek word used by classic writers with reference to the changes produced by the return of spring. It literally means a new birth, the implanting of a new principle or disposition in the soul, the impartation of spiritual life to those who are by nature dead in trespasses and sins. Not a bad definition of business the way it's being run today. In the sense that we use it, it was first used by Buckminster Fuller in his 1938 book, 9 Chains to the Moon, where he talked about transforming from an extractive to a regenerative force. He said, I'm convinced that creativity is a priori to the integrity of the universe, and that life is regenerative and conformity meaningless. He felt that humanity's purpose was to glimpse our semi-divine functioning potential, local universe information gatherers and local universe problem solvers in support of the integrity of eternally regenerative universe. It's a somewhat wordy definition, but it gives you a sense of the flavor that this is a very different approach than we're greedy bastards and we're just in it for the money. Bucky said you never change things by fighting the existing reality. You build a new model that makes the old way obsolete. So as we now see this concept of regeneration, of regenerativeness emerging, we have the risk of getting in a fight over, is it regenerative or is it sustainable? Bill McDonough, the architect, has been attacking sustainability. He says, nothing's more boring. Would you be happy if your marriage was sustainable? Actually, I suppose for a lot of people, they would. We have a tendency to act like a bucket of crabs. As soon as anybody starts to get elevation, the rest claw them down. And I think we need to stop this. Sustainable, regenerative, happiness, doesn't matter so much what you call it. What matters is, are we working on this together? And is the work that we're doing creating an economy in service to life? John Fullerton puts forth this graph derived from Green architect Bill Reed, that where we are now is a degenerative economy. We're destroying life on Earth. And that we need to come up this arc of transition through what is conventionally called green, sustainable. We need to do a lot of restoration. We need to repair the damage we've done, but that where we ought to be aiming for is a regenerative economy in which we use systems thinking, in which we take our principles from how natural systems have always worked. He defines a regenerative economy as applying nature's laws and patterns of systemic health, self-organization, self-renewal, and regenerative vitality to our society and our economy. In this paper, Regenerative Capitalism, which I highly recommend that you get and read, he laid out these 8 principles. In right relationship, this comes from the ecological economists, the concept that the economy is this little linear process inside of society, which is itself inside of the biosphere. And that we need to understand the relationships of these. You cannot have a healthy economy in a sick society, and you cannot have a healthy society in a sick biosystem. Our relationships with each other have to be right. The relationship of business to community has to be in right relationship. Holistic wealth. Money's useful, but it's not wealth. Wealth is well-being, it's belonging, it's having a place in society. It's many things beyond just money. Innovative and adaptive. Humans are entrepreneurial. We begin again. Empowered participation. There has to be equity. And you have to have a say in the systems that impact you. Edge effect abundance. This is the biomimetic concept that in nature, the most abundant ecosystems are where two come together, where a river meets the ocean in an estuary, where a meadow meets a forest, where there's an edge. Why is it abundant? Because it's diverse. And this diversity is what is the wellspring of abundance in nature. Seeks balance between efficiency and resilience. Both are useful. Our economy now is extremely efficient at flowing money to the top. It's very brittle. It breaks easily. And yet, if you have a system that is entirely resilient, entirely redundant, it's not very efficient. What we need is this balance between them. A regenerative economy honors community and place. We can have a dynamic global economy so long as every place within it, every community, every ecosystem has its integrity. These core principles of this new story are all interrelated. There's no one that's more important. There's no one that you can do without. But learning these and beginning to apply them in your life, in your work, in your community is, I think, core to the way forward. If you want a Cliff Notes version of this thesis, you can get it in this paper in Fast Company that John and I wrote. Here again are some of the concepts, the edge effect abundance, that this is where you get the greatest upwelling of life and of diversity and of abundance. The circular economy. People used to think the earth was flat until we went out into it. The earth is round. There is no away. You can't throw something away. We need to see our economy as circular, just as our bodies are circular. The blood flowing through us is what nourishes all of our cells and brings us life. When you apply this to business, as Anders has done, you find that implementing a circular economy of eliminating the concept of waste. What we think of as waste is in nature food for something else. And in the economy, it is the resource that can be needed for yet another economic process. When you implement this, you create jobs, you dramatically cut carbon emissions, you empower a renewable economy. That this is core to our economic prosperity as we live on what is, after all, only a little planet. Companies are starting to do this. DNVGL, the big assurance company, wrote this report, The Road Less Taken, committing itself to becoming a regenerative company, to a new narrative of economy, and the purpose of the economy and the corporation, a new concept of wealth and progress, and a new purpose for humanity. The European Union has begun to pick up these concepts in their 750 billion euro green recovery plan. They put concepts like climate protection, regenerative agriculture at the heart of this. When you do, you create jobs. This green economy, clean economy, regenerative economy is the job creation engine. And we're moving in that direction. Coal plants are closing. Oil and gas facilities are closing as we pivot to renewable energy. And this pivot generates 10 times the number of jobs that you would get from investing in central station power plants, in the extractive industries. Solar and wind are the fastest growing job categories. In 2019, solar grew 17 times faster than the entire US economy. And this is true in the States. California's green economy grew 3 times faster than the traditional economy. It outperforms in a down economy, and it is the route to good paying jobs. The Kauffman Foundation showed that the job creation engine is not the big companies, it's the little startups. In this particular graph, the big companies were net job destroyers. The jobs are created by entrepreneurs, by people taking a risk, and by people moving into these new technologies. This is a very different story than you have been told. This is the story of a regenerative economy. We're an interesting species, aren't we? We make up a story and then we convince ourselves that it's true. So we built the story of neoliberalism. We're like, well, it must be true. Capitalism, as it has been practiced, my friend Randy Hayes, founder of Rainforest Action Network, calls it cheater capitalism or cheater economics. It's not based on natural law. It's not physics. It's not even really a science. It's a story. It's our creation. We told it to ourselves. We can tell ourselves a different story. There are a number of people working on this concept of what does a regenerative world look like. Daniel Christian Wall has done brilliant writing on what are the foundations and what is it that we want. Thrivable economies, human development, flourishing biosphere, resilient habitats, circular manufacturing, thriving. This is really what we all want. The folks at Regenesis, Pamela Mang, Bill Reed, have been working on these concepts in the built environment. They laid out this variant of the graph that John Fullerton had, that patterns of harmonization move from organisms to the world as a whole, what has been called Gaia, the living world. And human consciousness moves from anthropocentric, it's me, it's all about me, to integral. And as you move up this arc, you stop being wasteful, you become more efficient, more conservative of resources. You begin to understand your role in nature. of living buildings, of biophilia, the scientific concept that humans have an innate love of nature. We need nature, both to be in it, to be surrounded by it. That's why people like to have a plant in their office, something of nature. Regenerative design, and then regenerative development. Bio-becoming, where we are coming to be part of nature. The UN has begun to take this up, recognizing that we need to move beyond this concept of sustainability, the static concept, to designing regenerative cultures. The Sustainable Development Goals as the bridge to the creation of a regenerative world. We believe that a finer future is possible. We can create a world that works for 100% of humanity, arising from recognizing that all of us have a right to dignity. When we do this, we will unleash the greatest prosperity humanity has ever known. Achieving it requires this new vision of a future of greater well-being, of engagement with nature and each other. We will overcome the resistance as we realize this is what we want. We can change the story. We can redefine and transform the economy from one that only delivers shareholder maximization to an economy in service to life. I hope you will join me in this. As William Gibson said, the future is already here. It's just not widely distributed yet. We have everything we need to achieve this, except the commitment to do it. My old boss, David Brower, used to say, what do we want the earth to be like 50 years from now? Let's do a little dreaming. Aim high, he said. Navigators have aimed at the stars for centuries. They haven't hit one yet, but because they aimed high, they found their way. Aim high.